All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Karen, roll call, please.
Jerry?
Here.
Doug?
Here.
John?
Here.
Karen? Here.
And before we do a motion on the agenda, we do have one change. Under Administration, Section 4, items C, D, and E are all resolutions approving an internal loan. We're going to move those to our next agenda, so we'll look for those in November. So that change being noted, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the amended agenda. Second that. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
All right, agenda carries with 4. And the next item then is citizen comment. We have one member of citizen here, I believe in an advisory capacity. Steve, anything you want to say as a citizen?
Nothing as a citizen.
Annie?
I am good, thank you.
All righty, we will move past citizen comment then, thank you. Next up is the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. No, second. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries.
Make that motion? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what I said. Okay.
John made the motion, carries with 4. So next up is the public hearing on the proposed development agreement with Petra Enterprises. So with that, this has been published as documented. So we will open the public hearing. Does anybody have anything they care to say regarding the proposed development agreement with Petra Enterprises?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing. Second. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 4. Then we have the actual resolution approving the development agreement with Petra Enterprises. The development agreement and the resolution are both in the board docs. Is there any discussion needed on this before a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution approving the development agreement with Petra Enterprises. Second that. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 4. Next, we have the public hearing on a proposed development agreement with Spiegel Family Realty. Again, documentation of it being published is in the board docs. So we will open the public hearing. Does anybody have any commentary to offer to the council on the proposed development agreement with Spiegel Family Realty?
Motion to close public hearing. I'll second. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 4. And we will move right into that same resolution, approving the development agreement with Spiegel Family Realty. The development agreement and the resolution are both in the board docs. Any discussion needed?
I'll make a motion for approving the agreement with Spiegel Family Realty. I'll second. Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 4. That moves us to the administration section, and the first item in there is the stormwater ordinance. And I see we are honored to have Mr. Schmeckel here.
The honor of all mine, thank you, Mayor, and City Council of Peosta. I don't know if anyone remembers me or not. It's pretty good presentation to City Councilmember Ryan remembers me. That's a good thing. And of course, Jerry Hess is on our Epic People Arts Authority Board, so that's a great thing. Good asset to that board. I wanted to come in and just chat a little bit, maybe the history of the county stormwater erosion control ordinance, what Epworth and Farley and the city of Asbury has done with our stormwater ordinances and so forth. I've talked with Whitney back and forth through the past few months on the SRF sponsorship projects. I've been involved with those now for a little while, the city of Duke and Capital Street WMA. And a lot of this discussion kind of of spurred from a previous Catfish Creek Watershed Authority Board members. If you guys remember, the Catfish Creek Watershed Authority Board is a group that's made up of City of Dubuque, Asbury, Peosta, Soil Conservation District in Dubuque County. So we meet quarterly, and that board right now has roughly $800,000 left, $700,000 left, I want to say, in water quality or water project funding for specifically Catfish Creek. And kind of what sparked, I think, some of the ordinance language to date right now is just backing up 1 second. The county passed this stormwater.
Eric, if I can for 1 second, we have one person online. I just want to check the audio and see if she can hear.
Absolutely.
Annie, are you able to follow what's being said here?
He's echoing a little bit, so it's hard to catch everything he's saying.
Do you want me to move up a little bit?
If you would, please. In fact, if you'd like, just bring a chair up and we'll point the microphone right at you.
How's this? Is this better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Great.
Good deal.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Eric.
So 2010, the county approved, they were one of the first counties in the state of Iowa to approve a stormwater ordinance and the erosion control ordinance that really kind of started to, the concept, the idea behind it was to try and level the playing field with all the different activity going on. When a set of plans would come in to the engineer, to zoning, how are we being fair? How is everyone being treated fairly as it relates to stormwater, detention basins, and so forth? So that's been around now for the past decade. I've been administering that and enforcing it. And there's definitely been some learning curves along the way. 2013, the city of Asbury adopted that ordinance with some modifications to fit the city of Asbury. And the city of Asbury, in a lot of ways, I think, is where the city of Peosta was 10, 12, 15 years ago as growth started to really take off there in the late 2000s and so forth. And right now I can tell you from the city, because I work with the city of Asbury under a contract on their MS4 stormwater, there's been a lot of significant challenges and problems that have come up from past development that really goes back 20 years ago. And that's one of the reasons that I'm going to try and persuade you into taking a close look at drafting a stormwater ordinance. There's multiple reasons. That's one of them. I believe it's a very worthwhile cause as it relates to water quality and flooding and the challenges that we face together as a community. But if you look at Asbury as an example, in fact, I just hung up. We had our stormwater committee meeting tonight. There have been significant projects, retrofit projects, several different citizen complaints throughout the past. I've been working with them since 2012, and I can't tell you how much money they've spent on stormwater things, drainage problems, and so forth. So the conversation has led to, and I don't know if Jerry, I'm sure remembers this, but Kelly Oaks was this ravine stabilization project. We were looking at doing some stabilization there. The discussion, the application was submitted to the Catfish Creek Watershed Authority Board. Discussion took place, and essentially a lot of the directors there said, why are we paying for things in Peosta, city of Peosta, improvements or problems that they've caused now from stormwater discharge? Why are we paying for them when they don't have a stormwater ordinance? And basically said we weren't, the Catfish Creek Watershed Authority Board would not be interested in funding any kind of project in the city of Peosta. However, if a stormwater ordinance was passed, they would, I think, entertain the idea of bringing it back and so forth. So that was 18 months ago, I'm going to say.
Right, it was right when I started.
2 years ago, yeah. So, so we kind of, it was kind of a discussion point. We had federal NRCS look at that project at the time, which started off as we were kind of looking at a $30,000 to $50,000 project, which now I believe has gotten a lot, much more expensive through the different practices being suggested. And that's another point that we can kind of revisit. But I think the Catfish Creek Board, and I'm obviously speaking on behalf as an administrator for the board, but I think they would entertain the idea if the city of Peosta approves an ordinance. I know, during that whole process, I believe IIW was working on a drainage report for the city. I know the girl that was working with IIW left IIW, and so there's a draft ordinance around right now. Whitney had shared the draft ordinance with me. I had some suggestions. I discussed it with Steve Thompson behind me a little bit on trying to get on the same page of what the draft might look like and so forth. But I really wanted to just make myself available to you to have you guys ask any questions as it relates to stormwater, as it relates to erosion control, as it relates to costs, and so forth.
Super, thank you for that. Clarification real quick, the one that's in board docs, what version of the ordinance is this? Is this after all the latest commentary and markup?
Well, we haven't really changed it based on Eric's comments yet. So this is the draft as it was. Just on Monday, Steve and Eric and I met, and I think for the most part we're in agreement on his comments are well received, and I think we agree. It's really just sort of polishing up and fitting it in, and maybe there's a couple sort of decisions that need to be made. But no, we haven't integrated. I haven't touched this since I put this ordinance in there a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
But the structure is entirely the same. It's just really probably a couple paragraphs that need added. And I can safely say it won't actually probably mean much to the council. It's pretty highly technical additions that need to be made.
So I think I'll speak for myself, and the council members can speak for themselves, but I recognize we're sitting on top of the hill, so to speak. There's a lot of downstream impacts from the decisions we make with the way we manage stormwater here, and we currently don't have anything in the books, so that's probably not the ideal state for us. So I certainly support the notion that we ought to have something to do a better job of at least laying the expectations out there. And it sounds like it's just a matter of now of nailing down the variables, right?
Yeah, I think that's where we're at. I came in and spoke to council a few different times over the years. It's been probably 5 or 6 years, I'm guessing, since I've been back. And we've learned quite a bit about what's working, what hasn't. And that was kind of our discussion yesterday of what I think are some things that should be included as it relates to drain tiles or culverts. Some of the water quality infiltration requirements that sit within the county ordinance right now can be challenging for a developer or homeowner to understand and to implement. So I think we need to look at how we offer flexibility to that, but also don't just completely get away from what a water quality volume standard is, meaning we're trying to slow water down, we're trying to hold water back, infiltrate water back into the ground. I mean, that's historically what used to happen before it was converted to either compacted soils or impervious surface with high amounts of runoff, impacting downstream property owners. So I think it would be great to have Peosta, included in this. Myself, we actually just went through a new 2080 agreement with the Stormwater Conservation District and the City of Dubuque and Dubuque County. So it's a significant increase in funding for the district. We're hiring 2 more additional people. One will serve as a conservation agronomist, maybe working with farmers more one-on-one on farmland projects, but then the other one is an urban watershed coordinator working with more one-on-one builders, developers, plats, and myself, and I'll be included in both those. But that's exciting news as the communities and the county, the city, and smaller cities now are coming together to all play a role in stormwater development and so forth. So with that, hopefully comes some more significant dollars, like a $500,000 SRF grant that you guys just received, which is fantastic news. And I think that's kind of part 2 of this conversation, is how those dollars get spent in the city of Peosta. If Kelly Oaks does turn out to be, I think Kelly Oaks is one that we need to revisit again for the dollars being associated with the workload and with the project. if that does turn out, or if Catfish Creek says, yep, they approved an ordinance, let's have this discussion again. Maybe there's funding that can come from Catfish Creek. Again, I think that discussion is open. But I think more importantly, looking at the $500,000 of where it could most cost effectively be spent for the city. I know originally when I had met with Whitney and the IDOL staff and MSA on potential projects, we had talked about a constructed wetland or regional kind of detention basin for future growth within the city to kind of start providing some of that land and so forth. And I think that would be a pretty significant project and a very good use of dollars for the city as well too, which also potentially could change land values and so forth. When you look at a requirement of, this is what's required for you, it starts to have the engineers brainstorm on how they're going to make sure that requirement is met for the city.
So I don't want to dominate this. How about council members? Any questions so far?
There's no, go ahead. Is there a reason that we wouldn't want to have one of these ordinances?
So it just it adds some extra steps for our developers and builders. It shifts some responsibility to them, which is a good thing, but I will probably say there's dollars attached to that. Right, so that's when Jim asked me 10 months ago when I presented this the first time, what does this mean exactly? I did not do a very good job of saying it. And it can mean different things. Different lots are, sometimes it's really not an issue. They have plenty of space or they don't have a lot of impervious surface, but for others it can be more difficult. If it's a small lot, they don't have a lot of space to install some of these practices. It can change things. So, but that's not a reason not to do it. In my opinion, it's the right thing to do. But we have talked about strategically finding that sweet spot where we're being responsible and cultivating a culture here among the developers of doing the right thing, but also that it provides us with that statutory authority. We've been fortunate right now, and Steve can speak to this, and that the developers we've worked with are okay with just doing what we ask, but we have faced this with some other, not unfortunately stormwater, but with other issues, and we ask them to do the right thing, and they tell us, no, I currently don't have the ability to force them to make the right choice with water quality. So I look at, things have been awesome since I've been here. We haven't seen a ton of commercial growth really. It's just been mostly residential the last 2 years. But we're kind of on the precipice of maybe this next big commercial push with a couple of projects we know going up on Commercial Court and Thunder Free and potentially the lagoon. So I think the timing is pretty fortuitous here with getting something in place that can have a sizable impact. And the opportunity with the constructed wetlands we talked about in the potential land acquisition is that if that land would be acquired by somebody else, that opportunity could be gone in the blink of an eye. Which, to Eric's point about land values, if we are able to contain that water there, that increases the value of that land because they no longer would have to set aside portions of their lots. But if that's not the case, then that would immediately negatively impact certain developments.
I guess I think of it, right now, it's the city's kind of saying, do the right thing. We trust you guys to do the right thing. But what does do the right thing mean? And without having standards behind that, it's difficult to enforce that. How big should a certain detention basin be? How deep should it be? What size pipe should that be? How much pipe should be run? These are all things that get accounted for in the engineering documents when you actually have standards and procedures, the unified sizing criteria that goes with engineering stormwater, and can play a pretty big role. I'm not going to say it's not going to be more or less expensive. It just levels that playing field. It plays a pretty big role, I think, when you're trying to do the right thing. Well, do the right thing. Well, doing the right thing is costing a developer $100,000, and maybe they're not going to do the right thing. And down the road that will happen. You're going to start to get to that. It'll be a numbers game eventually.
For the most part, developers now, they don't have any issues with what we've been asking.
No, maybe that's a good conversation.
They haven't. The first question they ask me is, what are you going to require for stormwater? And I give a little chuckle and I say, right now, don't make it worse than what it is today. And in essence, that's kind of what this says, and we started getting down a rabbit hole yesterday of the granularity of this ordinance as far as what does that mean and what's reasonable for Peosta. And again, fortunately, most of them said, yeah, we get it, because that's pretty normal for around here, so they're used to that. But someone will challenge us at some point, or we'll have to say that's not enough, that's not what you said. You guys need a mechanism to enforce that. But, you know, again, knock on wood, that's been the first question they've asked. They want to do that, they just need some guidance. What's the specific requirement for here in Peosta?
Is that because they've seen communities around and they're just used to it?
It is. Yeah, you know, this wave, no pun intended since we're talking stormwater, but this wave has been coming for a while. And it's hit other communities first, it's hit other states much earlier than ours, and as it becomes more rural, it's just become more commonplace. And one of the things that Eric did talk about that I think is very relevant for you guys is he did mention MS4, which that means you're next to a big city that has a lot of drainage. You guys drain in the city of Dubuque. There's a pretty good chance for the next census you guys become an MS4, which means you're permitted and have to do some things. This is fundamental to that. So it does a lot of things for you. The one thing, as I said last Thursday, and you know, again, Eric and I talked yesterday, we want to make sure that this is something that applies to you guys. What's fair in Dubuque and Des Moines and Chicago and Milwaukee doesn't apply to Peosta, but a lot of it does. So let's make sure that we are fair to what's going on here. And so that's kind of the work that's ahead of us.
Is there anything not in there that's going to be needed for the MS4 certification?
I don't think so, Eric. So Eric deals with that a lot more than I do on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I was sitting in your parking lot, he and I were on the same committee meeting. He was giving his MS4 report for Asbury. So Eric, this pretty much covers the requirements for MS4 compliance, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when you guys, and who knows if the 2020 census is gonna push Peosta to be permitted, which means you're an MS4 city, and now you have basically 6 minimum control standards that you have to do. So those are typically tied to one of the big concepts is to have stormwater erosion control ordinances passed. But you also have illicit discharge ordinances that have to get accounted for. I mean, DNR actually writes your permit, and not every permit's the same. Smaller, I mean, I work with the city of Dubuque's permit and Asbury's permit. They're 2 different permits. There's a lot of same stuff that was in there, like the education part, storm sewer, requirements, but ordinance language will definitely be included in the permit to make sure that these smaller communities have ordinance language behind it.
And have you seen if a city or community, and again, we haven't seen a lot of Piostas come on board, a few in Iowa, but if an ordinance was in place to the MS4 make them change their ordinance, or were they largely in compliance with the ordinance that was in place when they became an MS4 community? I.e., if we get this in place, are they likely to come say, change this, that, or the other thing? My experience says no, but what's yours?
Yeah, I would say no, and I can almost assure you that if the ordinance is based on the Dubuque County ordinance and has a lot of the same language and narrative that sits within there, you guys will be in good shape. Because I know the stormwater coordinator of the state, we talked about different ordinances. This is something Asbury went through in 2013. Actually, EPA came up and did a site visit in Asbury after numerous complaints. And EPA was here for about a week and basically put the city of Iowa on probation. That's where I got involved, and that's where they started to address. They had erosion control and stormwater ordinances in place at the time, but they did have to revamp them, I guess, and improve them and so forth, and then show enforcement levels and so forth. And then they ended up, at that time, I believe is when they started to look at, creating the stormwater utility and funding that goes back behind it. Because the programs they cost cities dollars. So if that comes, I'm sure that's going to be probably next on the radar. It's kind of a heads up. And who knows, it might not be this year, it might be the next one. I would be surprised if it wasn't on this year, but just knowing how some of the smaller communities and their proximity to larger communities, they usually bump into MS4.
Well, and Dubuque's annexation might have been what triggered it, because you drained much more through the city than you did 10 years ago because of their annexation activity. So that actually might trigger you guys to become MS4.
Yeah. So I guess I look at it like it's it's hitting a lot of the check marks on a lot of different levels, as it relates to MS4, as it relates to, ordinance, as it relates to the $500,000 SRF funding that can be used for projects in the city. Yeah, I just, like I said, just wanted to make myself available tonight and share my experience and see if there's discussion questions.
In this ordinance, will this cover the developers that's doing subdivisions like Cox Springs Road, there for like 2 years, 3 years, every time it rains, Cox Springs budget just coming across. I noticed that with these subdivision on the corner, the developer's done up there, but there's still dirt that's getting washed off the road into the storm sewers and stuff up there. So will this cover things like that then too?
Yeah, that's exactly the intent behind it, is that you are covering not only erosion control, so the pre-construction activities of dirt moving and land disturbing activities that measures and best management practices are put in place, but also post-construction, the stormwater aspects where that water is grounded and stabilized. Something that we try and discuss a lot. I mean, right now, developers, technically speaking, if you're disturbing 1 acre or more ground, DNR would be enforcing that. But DNR also covers one person for 6 counties, so it can be difficult. So that's why it's also, I coordinate a lot with the DNR enforcement staff in Dubuque County.
Then would we add a spill prevention plan with this for the contractors? So if they're out there and this happened with the diesel tank started leaking all over the place.
Right.
And so should we tie something like that with the contractors through this?
Well, that it depends on what kind of permit level that would be, but everyone kind of handles their permits a little bit different. Like as far as communities go, I should say in the city of Asbury, when a home builder comes in to build a home and get that permit, he pulls out what's called a minor erosion control permit, and Asbury charges them $285 for that permit. County is the same way. We charge for a home erosion control permit. You're disturbing ground. With that becomes challenges to drainage and dirt running on neighboring properties. That's a lot of it started back in 2008. Supervisors get complaints all the time from drainage and dirt, mud. He's changing his yard. He redirected this. Throughout the county, that was one of many reasons of what happened there. So it depends on where the city would go with those permits. A big spill like that is going to typically always be handled with DNR. DNR has different levels of permitting and so forth. But
I think you ought to consider putting that in your subdivision ordinance though. I mean, that's not a bad thing to have in there.
Hazardous spills that we use.
right, yeah.
I have never in 27 years faced that question, but that can happen and probably should be dealt with.
So yeah, I guess if we go through this and we're trimming the fat, make sure we don't trim it down too much, then we have to add back in for.
Well, that's kind of where the point we're starting from here is probably one that was trimmed too much a little bit. There's some things we need to add back in there. There's some other things that we've talked about taking out of here though, to make it more applicable to you. So it's close, it's a good basis. This is similar to everyone else's around here, but it just needs to be Peosta-sized.
So the notion of doing, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, it doesn't sound like this would affect our developers because they're doing it anyway. This is just giving us some teeth. So when someone gets online, they're not to accept their hand.
Yeah, and like I talked about Thursday, we could easily spill this over into sewer water, some of the other stuff that we need to think about. And those are probably more problematic than this right now, honestly.
Yeah, and that's a conversation we've had. Dean's chimed in on before, that we need to review our improvement plans.
Water and sewer, what do they call it, specs?
Design standards, standard specs.
Yes, improvement standards. So we've kind of started that process, but yeah, it all really is along the same journey. There's just, the scope of everything's just gotten so much broader. There's a lot more coming under our purview right now, so.
We've been working on this for years.
Yeah, no, this is good, yeah, I mean, this is an eventuality, so I think, I've been talking to you about it for about a year, so I think we know the time is right, but it also fits in really well with some other projects we have. And we would love, it'd be a good partnership with, we'd like to be in step with the county and other communities. And I think the regional project particularly presents some opportunities for some good partnerships, which would be great for us. So if you guys, we wanted to make sure your questions get answered, because unfortunately, even throughout this process, I can't help you much with the technical stuff. So I wanted to get them here, but yeah, unless we hear any objections, we'd like to go forward and get that to a place that everybody likes it, including Steve, Public Works, Eric, anybody who could have skin in the game, and then we would look to put it back in front of you, and we'll have, with an ordinance, there'll be public opportunities for feedback, so that's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we would like to get that all rolling.
I would like to see some type of spill prevention in there for the contract.
Yeah, and I think between sidewalks and some of the culvert specs and being lots, I think we have a list of things we need to get in that ordinance anyway, so it's probably a good time to just put it in.
So I think I'm hearing universal support for the notion that we ought to do this, and we want to do it in collaboration with the DNR and the other authorities at play here. So appreciate the work that's going into it. I do have one question about the process, or at least the representation in it, because it's a technical document and it is going to involve some degree of balance, right? There's competing interests and we're trying to strike the right balance in there. Do we have the right players involved that would bring the developer perspective as well?
Kind of. And I'll tell you this as much as when this was adopted initially by the county and the city, ultimately Asbury, I was involved very closely in Asbury. There was an awful lot of developers involved. And at the time, that was where all the developers were doing stuff anyhow, so it was kind of who's who. So we had their comments then. Eric and Whitney touched on this Monday, that there is some lessons learned from that first go-around that need to be incorporated into yours. And so you'll get the advantage, I guess, of their input, their thoughts, what we've seen through that, incorporated into a more recent document. If you want more than that, if you want to, you can largely ask the same people to come back and comment on pretty much the same thing. But if that makes you feel better about the process, by all means. That's why I said kind of. It's kind of, it's been commented upon prior.
So they said, I know the last time Eric presented that AJ was here, and he's very clear about always wanting to do things the right way. He leads basically the conversation with that. So, yeah, and the technicality does present an issue because I can think of the conversations I would have with developers are probably them, it really needs to be not me and AJ, but Steve and AJ's guy. So it's just trickier because, I can think of Brett or Slavic, they need to send me the B's in because they're not gonna.
Right.
It's kind of some of the authenticity might get lost in that.
And the process of adopting this would also have a public hearing, so there'd be another opportunity for that voice to be heard.
Right, through readings, it will not be, and that's only to our benefit. Everybody brave.
When we adopted this goes back 10 years ago, we sent it, the draft, and we went through several different drafts, and it took us about a year to get it done through the county, and one of those was just work sessions with all the local area engineers. They went to all their offices. We knew we wouldn't. I guess the feedback that we heard the most from builders was, whatever you do, try and make it uniform across platforms, because we hate going to the city and we hate going to Peosta, building a house here, and I got to learn these requirements are different than these, and they kind of said, we don't really care. We'll pay the permits and that's going to be it, but just make it so there's flow to it, and
do it collectively together. That was one of the kind of the resounding comments I think we heard from the building community. I don't think anyone was jumping up and down for more permits from that, from their avenue, but, the engineers had some good discussions, I think, at the time. But, the county wanted to do something that they felt was going to be something that was aggressive, but at the same time, and I've tried to use my judgment, working with engineers and developers in general the last decade of using common sense and looking at site plans effectively, soils effectively, not trying to put things where they don't belong just because that's what the ordinance says I need to do. And I think that's where the whole variance and being open to what are your actual goals of improving water quality. And obviously dollars go hand in hand with that. You can't talk about this without just talking about the financial impacts and creating all sorts of restrictions and problems that deter developers. So I think that's it's just you got to have a balanced approach, I guess. But yeah, I think the public opportunity gives that offers that.
Great.
So what would be our next step moving forward? Is it, I'm sure Whitney's going to need help doing this with engineers and stuff. So do we have her go out for bids, which I don't think would be correct to do?
Well, I think we're actually close-ish, right?
We got her.
Yeah, so I think we're actually, between the study with IW that they did over the past few years and the place they got the ordinance, it's not done, but I don't know how many engineer hours are left in it. Maybe 6, 8, maybe not even that many?
Probably not even that many.
I mean, because the structure, the language, all the legal crap that's going to read, that's already there. It's basically just some of those numbers and those requirements, like you have to do 2, or you have to do 3, or 1.25, or 1. I mean, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but that's basically, it's just really those kind of thresholds. There is one sort of section, I guess, that Eric said we need to, some performance standards that needs to be integrated back in, but a lot of the heavy lifting, like the bulky language.
Yeah, I don't think you guys need to reinvent the wheel by any means to create your own ordinance. It's all there. It's all available through the city of Asbury. You can go on their website, look at their stormwater ordinance. It's chapter 153. Go through it, and you can kind of start to play with it, tweak it. So. And
it's like 85% exactly our draft.
So I'll tell you, I'll charge you the same amount to finish it as I have to get to this one. I love that.
Well, and I should mention that, I mean, both Eric and Steve has been very, very generous with me with their time, which I appreciate because I don't like feeling like a fish in the desert, but that's totally what stuff like this makes me feel like. So I hate that I can't run the ball at all with this, but.
I was going to make a comment about that. I sense that there's a really good collaborative approach to this from the different entities because any one party could hold fast and try to pull this a direction. I don't see that happening, and I appreciate that very much. It goes a long way towards establishing trust. And we do, we're not that technical. We need you to work on our behalf.
So are you needing a blessing to move forward, or you?
Yeah, I more or less just wanted to hear your objections. I don't know that I need a formal motion. No, I think we're in good shape as long as I wanted to get your guys' questions answered was my first goal. Second, see if there were any, any problems you had with it, and then otherwise, we'll be playing with holiday timing here, but we'll.
I just don't want to add to the process, but like I said, I do would like to see.
Oh yeah.
Spill prevention.
No, that's great. I'm glad you brought it up because we really have been. We have to
put it in there somehow.
Checklist. Yeah, I didn't want you guys to be surprised. I want you to be surprised when it comes up again. The ordinances are not something simple,
So there'll be a couple more discussions amongst the experts, and then this will come back to the council in a proposed final draft form. And the timing of that generally.
2 weeks.
I think only because, and I'll try to. I can follow this for you guys.
Yeah, just set an expectation. That's all.
Yeah. Well, it's a crap time of the year for everybody. We got TIF stuff, budget stuff, a lot of.
See a Christmas carol to that effect?
Something like that, you know. For the renewal report, we gotta certify everything, and, you know, our sponsored project, it's just like, everything here is fever pitch all the time. So I think we were thinking like December, January.
Okay.
First year.
Before the spring construction season.
Right, but there's no need to like hold this hearing on Christmas Eve to get it through. There's not necessarily a massive incentive to get it done.
I think the incentive that we talked about on Monday was how does this coordinate with SRF for a project and making sure that as you guys, you know, I don't think it's something that has to happen in the next week or week. I think as long as there's things happening every month, be in good shape for finalizing your SRF projects. That's kind of the motivation. And like Karen said, springtime activities start to ramp up again and so forth.
We'd want to have it adopted by then.
Yeah, that would be ideal to have everything in place.
Yeah,
set.
and really Catfish meets again in December, Eric said, so I think my goal would to be at least have maybe the final draft presented for the council and you guys to set a public hearing on it before that meeting, so I guess we can report some actual.
Public hearings for one of the ones?
No, we'd have the reading. Well, yeah, I think we talked about how we want to message that.
Yeah, I haven't set a date for it yet, but probably should be ready around that time frame, yeah.
No, we're.
So we have something so we can talk about it then.
Yeah, I think it would be good to just with SRF as it relates to Kelly Oaks net stabilization project. I mean, our last conversation with I did talk to the state and DNR about that project because I know MSA threw a price tag of $150,000, and I was trying to wrap my head around just how expensive that project is for what the city is getting out of it. Essentially, the watershed, the water quality impacts. That's a pretty expensive project. So I think we, you know, in my opinion, revisit that. I need to revisit myself with the site and just kind of look at it and see if there's other less expensive avenues that there could be for, you know, maybe some velocity dissipation or discharge dealing with those stormwater pipes that are coming into the park. But yeah, we'll tackle that for the next month, but that can kind of happen at the same time. Looking at kind of getting a final draft version of the ordinance done.
So I'd like just go up there, if we could slow it down and maybe hold it, and then release it, and hold it, release it, and make walking areas so you get from one hole to the other.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it might not be I guess it might not be an approved SRF project of using those dollars for that. Maybe it's just a $10,000 fix that the city puts into it, but then it frees up $150,000 to spend in your stormwater regional wetland area. That would potentially be a much more cost-effective project, I believe, for the city.
Mm-hmm.
But those are all things that we can kind of juggle in the next, and I'm happy to meet anyone out at Kelly Oaks if we want to walk the site and try and think about the dollars being associated with that site. I know the SRF program well, and they won't fund, Catfish wouldn't be able to fund a straight conveyance program where we're just pouring riprap down ravines and stabilizing it. They'll fund an entire park project. So that means native restoration, that might mean tree removal, that might be flex matting, that's how you get to this $150,000 project. Well, then you have to look at those numbers and say, is that really a good use of our $500,000?
Because really the need started in just figuring out how to cross the street, right? I mean, that's what the park really started with. They were thinking,
Keep from washing out.
right, and they're just saying, how do we connect to this?
You put that in there and it washes out the first big storm, it comes down through there so fast.
So yeah, we can maybe meet that goal without dropping 60.
Some kind of potential.
I'm just wondering if you've got enough velocity control in there. I know it's a difficult site. I don't know, maybe we can convince Steve to design us something for $50,000. But anyway, I am happy to revisit that, you know, and just kind of figure out what we've got going on there. When we started with that project, it was $30,000, $40,000, and then it was $60,000, and then it was 75, and then it was 100, and then everyone kind of started saying, well, I don't know if we're going to spend $150,000 on a stabilization project that had very, very little to do with reducing flooding or water quality, really. And that's really what the SRF program is designed to do. Is, so I understand DNR saying we're not going to fund a conveyance program to you guys to get a stream crossing. That's not the intent of this program. But you guys are going to do construct wetlands and regional detention. It's going to have impacts to downstream property owners. That's what that water quality and downstream property, that's what the dollars are for. So anyway, just kind of revisit that in the next 30 days here.
All right, we good for now?
Good thing you can talk about stormwater, didn't you?
Oh, I was looking forward to it. I've been waiting all week for this. Eric, if I can, I'll give you this. I would like to walk through with you when you come through.
Okay. That would be great.
Thank you. I normally shake your hand.
Yeah, I know how that
And
goes.
say thank you. All right. Steve, was there anything else you were here to
I was
contribute
just
for?
asking if you guys had anything else for me, otherwise.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, let me spin the microphone back around. Annie, how'd we do on getting you to hear some of that?
Yeah, I heard a good amount of the presentation, and then for what some of the feedback was, I'll just follow up tomorrow. I'll call you and Whitney tomorrow, Jim.
Okay, and our recording is also going to be available as usual.
Perfect. Yep, I will listen to that tomorrow morning too. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thanks for working through that with us. So that was 4A. We'll move on to the resolution setting a date for the public hearing on the general obligation loan related to the wastewater treatment facility. I think we're looking for a motion to put that on.
This is not the.
Oh, sorry.
This is.
Narrative, please.
Sorry, yeah, so this is we're going through the steps to authorize us to borrow the money for what is a nice setup project, but including the sewer, lift station extension, that's the goal of the dollars. Cox Springs, and this is all detailed in the CIP. So this will also cover Cox Springs South and North. The South being totally reconstructed and city limits by the county, so this will include our cost share as well as the North. This also covers the
Stormwater, the Peosta Streets Road.
yes, so the culvert under Peosta Street will be bid in the same contract with the sewer work. The sewer line that's coming up is going to clear to the main lift station,
So it's in support of our CIP
correct,
projects.
sorry, yeah, it's the big 22 bond, and also the, just a portion of the annexation utilities.
Okay.
Correct. No, that's correct.
So what we have in front of us is a resolution to set the date for that public hearing related to that GEO bond, and we're looking for a date of November 10th, right?
I'll make the motion. Second.
Motion carries with 4. So the next 3 items, C, D, and E, we're going to kick to a future meeting, and that takes us to F, the contract payment number 4 and final payment for Horsefield related to Pat Simon Drive.
Make the motion to pay the final total payment for Horseville. I'll second.
Motion carries with 4. Next up is the mobile food vendors ordinance. This is the initial adoption of it, right?
The council is ready, yes.
So this would, the default process here is the ordinance takes 3 motions, one to approve the first reading, a motion to waive the second and third readings, and then a motion to adopt the ordinance if we choose to go that route. So with this being the first reading, Do we have a motion to approve the first reading?
I'll make the motion to approve the first reading. I'll second. Doug, aye. John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 4. And procedurally, there would be a second and third readings. Does anyone want to make the motion that we would waive the second and third readings for the mobile food vendor ordinance?
I'll make a motion to leave second and third readings. Second that. Doug, aye.
Nay.
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Motion carries with 3. Karen, may I ask what the reservation is? Well, I would like to have heard that in the discussion.
Just a matter of getting, when the public sees the minutes, they have one more opportunity.
Okay.
It's just something that, I don't know how many people are aware of it. So, short opinion on it.
So be it. Had that been before the second, we maybe have, others may have chosen to go the same way with you. I just encourage you to bring that up before we get to a vote. So the second and third have been waived by procedure, and so we can entertain a motion to adopt it.
Make the motion to adopt it.
And second,
Doug, aye.
You made the motion, correct, Karen? Or no?
I thought I thought it had to be in unanimous with second and third, to waive the second and third. I thought you had to have unanimous vote to waive.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Yeah, whatever. Just go ahead.
Okay, so Doug had the motion. Karen, I think you had the second, correct? So we're at a roll call vote.
Doug, aye.
Mm.
John, aye. Jerry, aye.
Okay. So the mobile food vendor ordinance passes with 4 ayes. Similarly, we've got the animal control ordinance amendment. This ordinance existed. Karen, could you just briefly describe what changed in the ordinance?
Sure. What we did and we spoke about was taking the fee out and having a fee resolution, adopting all of the fees so that it's easier to change. And everything is in one place, so that will make it easier for staff. The other item that we added, and this is something that we have been doing, is licenses purchased in the middle of the year. We don't feel that they should have to pay that full year price when they're gonna have to renew in January. So just license purchased between July and December, the fee will be half. And then we took out all of the references to the police department, because in the original ordinance it said either get your license from City Hall or the police department. We're just trying to make it more true to what is the actual reality of how the dogs are being licensed.
All right, thank you.
What is our cost if we take a animals?
I believe it went up to 115 per dog. For cats, I think it went up about 110.
Cats are
Over $100.
Right.
We use the tags quite a bit to relocate the dogs.
You know, the benefits of it, like we discussed last month, is that the police department, once we get it, if they're tagged, we can bring it right to their house. Instead of taking it in, where we have to pay the fee of $115, and then the families would have to go in and pay their fee to get it out of whatever that is. I believe it's over $100 also, so that's $200 and some dollars that we're trying to, get away from. Doesn't have enough in the home, but.
Enough.
Right.
I'll make a motion to approve the first reading of the animal control ordinance.
I'll second. Doug, aye.
And
John, aye. Jerry, aye. I'll make a motion to waive the second and third readings.
I'll second. Doug, aye.
I,
John, aye. Jerry, aye. I'll make a motion to adopt the ordinance.
Second that,
And John, aye.
So first reading approved with 4 ayes, second and third waived with 4 ayes, and the motion, or the ordinance adopted, animal control ordinance adopted with 4 ayes. And then related to those, we have the final item here that's related, which is the resolution establishing fees. This is a new ordinance for us, or new resolution, I should say, not an ordinance. And it fills in where the dollar values were previously buried into the ordinance. They're now in this resolution form.
Okay, so this is a new format, as Jim mentioned, and this is a nice thing for both the staff and the public to have fees in one place. Rather now, when we need to change things, we have to try to find the original ordinance or resolution that it was, then name that, replace that, and then have to try to track that one is no longer valid, although it's still in the resolution book. So I think I would say we feel really good about this current format. Now, the numbers on here, a good chunk of these are new, so those are things that Karen and I will do research and looking around. So I would say we're very attached. We certainly want to move to this fee or resolution. If there are any specific dollars on here that you have a big issue with, certainly let us know. I think I told them that we're more attached to this structure than any of these specific numbers. The more research we did, though, we did realize that most cities are approach this in a manner to cover the cost. Particularly with zoning items, there are a lot of mailings, addition notifications, publications, sort of hard cost things involved. So that's how we approach this. The subdivision plat was actually the first conversation that drove me to communicate with other city administrators to get what their subdivision platting fees were, because we know that we outlay a significant amount of dollars when we get a plat come in. It goes back and forth between us and engineering, sometimes the developer several times, and thousands of dollars of engineering fees are incurred generally because there's non-compliance. Like, did you read this back? You can't do this. Okay, now we fix that. Now engineers got to look at it again. So things like that. And with the stormwater, you're certainly going to have this kind of stuff come into play too. So with the cost of engineering being passed on, we're doing a couple things. We're not, I would say, wastefully or allowing any other party to wastefully spend taxpayer dollars, but we're also making it clear that we're not profiting from this permit or this fee in any way. We are only directly assessing whatever our charge is. So I like that transparency because, again, we're not in the permitting game is not about making money, but certainly some people can manage that.
what's the special permit fee?
So that's on the zoning ordinance. If someone in a R1 wanted to do an Airbnb, I think that requires a special permit. So they would have to, there's a notification process that goes with that. And then, just the processing in City Hall, the review. All the variance, the special permit, the Board of Adjustment hearing, the amendments, and the plan unit development are all related to zoning and all requiring notice. And we're not charging for those notices.
And I just plopped Asbury's and Dyersville in there, but this is very common. You can Google any city you can think of. Permits and fees, and there's different structures.
With the special council meeting, then somebody requesting us to have one.
Correct. Yeah, Karen mentioned there was an instance in which you guys had to come together to approve there was an alcohol.
This was years ago.
Yeah, so I mean, but that would be an example of somebody requests something that is of a timely nature.
And basically it's, that they had missed a deadline.
Right.
And,
Yeah, and that's not something we're obviously in regular practice of doing,
but that would pay the council. That's where that comes from.
Does that pay for 5 council members and a mayor?
Yes,
Okay.
and taxes. And others.
And my mom's.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. The action to the council is to, motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
That guy.
John, I.
Motion carries with 4. If I may, I don't want to do this, but if I go back to, I don't think it changes the intent of what we have, Karen, but on the animal control ordinance, I meant to say this earlier, paragraph 2 on the first page, I think there may be an extraneous use of the word fee in the title of that paragraph. Like I said, it means that what I actually signed would be different than what we have here.
Which paragraph is that, Jim?
Paragraph 2, it says license fee application form. Did you intend for the word fee to be in there?
I did a copy and paste, it's probably in the original, but I will take it out.
Okay. That caught my eye. But for the sake of transparency, we'll cover that now, and then we can move on. Thank you. So next on the agenda is IIW invoice related to the wastewater treatment facility, additional charges. To set this up, do I understand correctly, we had previously paid our last payment to them for their services, and this is now coming in addition to?
That's correct. This amount is in addition to the contract that is in place, which is why you see it in front of you today as opposed to, as a separate agenda item, as opposed to the,
Just on the claims list.
correct, the
So-
normal invoices as part of the contract.
It was not previously budgeted, and it is in excess of $10,000.
Correct.
For spending
correct,
authority.
correct.
Okay, so Whitney and I talked about this previously, and it caught my attention, given the relationship to the government spec requirements. So I did a little digging into this and had a conversation with the EDA that was apparently the source of this additional work that was needed, as alleged by IIW. I'm not satisfied that the city ought to pay this. I think this is more rooted in the work that was done or not done by IIW. So it would be my recommendation to table this until we can have a subsequent conversation with IIW. And then if the result of those conversations put this over $10,000, it would come back to this council. If the result is less than 10, then it would be an administrative issue for Whitney.
My take on it is, first of all, they should be here to explain why. Second of all, they screwed up, so I don't think that we should pay that amount.
So I'm wanting to ask, you're right, to get their input on what I think is their mistake. So they ought to have an opportunity to do that. I guess my assertion would be, I don't know that needs to be in front of the council. I think that can be an administrative issue. It's not until there is a liability in excess of $10,000 that it needs to come to the council.
I'll make a motion to table. I'll second.
That guy.
Karen,
John, I.
All right.
Well, at the same time, I think it would be nice to hear from them, like Doug said, all of us, I'd like
Even if they come back and they agree, they still should come to us and
explain to us why we have a whole other penny.
No, I don't need to be here first. They can take it down, they can show up.
So we certainly have the latitude to ask for that. Administratively, I don't think it ought to be driven administratively, but if we ask for it, by all means, then we'll go that path. Is that the preference of the council? All right. Very good. Then we will ask IIW to attend and explain. So moving on to item K, resolution accepting infrastructure in the Royal Oaks 4th edition. This resolution basically says that we accept the water main, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and street paving as completed by Royal Oaks Development. And we can
This
take-
is his team,
That's correct, repeatedly, yeah.
There was a walkthrough too with IIW previous, and there was a punch list, and I believe that he said that the punch list has not been completed.
I don't know the name of the far one, it's the first one. before you
Okay,
turn
those
around.
should both be under warranty yet.
The one in the middle of the other street is out, so it's one of the street.
Those are all lights now, so those should be warranty issues.
So we'll have Dean follow up on those.
Yeah, I mean, that unfortunately, regular maintenance sort of issue.
I'll make a motion with, accepting the infrastructure roads 4th edition.
Second that guy.
Try it.
Motion carries with 4. And then the Uliana Water Main Extension cost share. This could probably use a little narrative.
Yes, so we briefly discussed this at the work session, but I'm not sure, I guess, if you would like to make a motion now, or do you want me to just bring, when it's completed, bring the invoice? Well, I mean, I wanted to know you're on board. I didn't really think through if you would prefer to make a motion now in support of the cost share not to exceed $48,000, which is the competitive bid threshold, or if you're not comfortable doing that, because that obviously daily far exceeds my authority, we can wait. But again, we would like your at least informal lesson on the project, because it is going to happen very shortly.
It wasn't 48,000. What was the estimated cost of it?
48,000 would be our share, yeah, I think it's 90 something's the.
96 would be like 48 half.
I have the numbers on there. But just to make sure.
So this was a discussion item then. We won't actually take a motion on this since we have no document in front of us, right?
Who's paying for the other half again?
The developer.
This is to make the blue. Yeah.
Correct, yeah, so the project is, they would not be doing the project for, if we wouldn't have requested it be done. But we needed to loop the water system to provide the adequate pressure to all of the neighborhoods.
So this is coming from us, our request.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, there's just,
I think that we do it, I mean, we're estimating that we do it.
Well, what's the next best alternative?
Well, in the past, we have, I'm talking more years ago, probably 10, 15, the developers were allowed to dead end, and then eventually the city needs to loop the projects anyway. So if it's not looped now, at some point it probably is going to have to be looped, and then we'd be on one for 100% of the cost, so.
Okay, so we're asking CrossFit to do more than what they had originally prepared to do
Correct.
as part of this development. So we've moved the target.
Correct.
I think I'm on board.
Yeah.
94,755.
And this is something too, that when you guys review the specs, that's probably something that should be added, that, you know, there's not gonna be dead end lines, that they're
Correct.
requiring the developers to loop them.
Yeah, you guys already invested pretty significantly in the system over there with the booster stations, sending it to Thunder Ridge, which completely met the need before Thunder Valley came online. Well, now that's where the dead end is coming to an issue, because we need to serve more than just people on this direct road. We need to be able to provide, currently the homes in Thunder Valley too, which there's only a couple of them, but they do not have adequate pressure.
It's more than just pressure, it's keeping money.
Correct. Yeah, there's a number of.
And if there's ever a break, you know, you can work your way around it, and there's lots of reasons to loop the water.
Well, even at a dead end, you can have still water in there.
So do you want a motion, or you just want a blessing? Which one do you want?
Well, I have one other question.
Sure.
The amount that's put out there, does that include whatever's needed to address not only flow but the pressure? I remember hearing from Dean some concern about the pressure downstream of the booster station.
Yes, so we've actually handled that issue separately.
Okay.
Not in addition to it, yeah, that is, all things will be handled through this project.
Did you make a motion? I was asking if they want a motion or if they just want a blessing.
Well, there's nothing to make a motion
You
on
just
that.
need to make a motion.
Okay.
Not to exceed.
I'll make a motion for the cost share not to exceed the $48,000. Second.
Motion carries with 4, and that is our final agenda item other than citizen comment. So the citizens in the room have left, and we have Annie still online. Annie, anything you care to add?
Nope, not at this time.
All righty.
I do have one more item, but I don't, he's not here to ask, I've been asking him a couple times about temporary sidewalks that were put in last fall.
The temporary sidewalk, you said?
By the fire station park, and there's a couple other spots. They're gonna get that this year, or? Yeah, no, they're gonna more, but I think that's been done.
No, I think they're still waiting to get under the railroad for the boards.
That, I think you're right, Jerry. They were waiting for the railroad permit, because those things take a while to get.
But
So-
that would be nice to see if we can get the common permit at the same time, they get a permit to go in there, so we can get 2
Good luck.
permits.
Good luck.
That's why I was the one.
He's going right out of engineering list people.
I did coincidentally talk with Dean about that last week as well, and he indicated to me he was following up with the contractor saying that this is no longer temporary. It needs a more permanent solution, and if it means it comes out again, it comes out again, but they've exceeded the temporary solution.
Stretching the.
Yeah.
How many other spots were there? There's more than that.
There's more than, yeah, there's a couple spots throughout town.
They carrying these ripped up your sidewalk again over there. I don't know why you have sidewalk over there.
My husband was saying today, that's the worst thing the city ever did, was give him a sidewalk.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Karen and I.
John.
Motion carries with 4. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.